Great. Well, thank you all for being here, both in person in a little warmer than expected room, as well as those online as well. So thank you all for coming here. We're really excited to have today's discussion. And really, it's because this is such a critical issue, not just to Microsoft and the UNFCCC, but really for all of us here represented today. And we're going to really get into the details about it. Specifically, we're really going to talk about data interoperability and the role that it plays in sustainability reporting, and the success for both the voluntary and the regulatory space, which we'll learn more about today, is growing. Also, technologies such as cloud and AI can truly help reduce the reporting challenges and accelerate progress, and we're excited to talk more about some of those tools. And then as we shift from this voluntary world to a mandatory reporting world, we really need to see continued collaboration, accountability, and action to drive meaningful progress, both here and around the world. So today, I'm thrilled to welcome my guests. They're three incredible experts who are on the front lines of navigating the sustainability reporting landscape. First, I have Esther, the Chief Sustainability Officer at City Development in Singapore and a board member of GRI. I have Michael Okoroafor, the Chief Sustainability Officer of McCormick and Company, and Carol Browner, the Senior Counsel at Covington. So with that, let me start the discussion off. Really, I want to start with you, Carol. When it comes to data standards and interoperability, I want to start with really highlighting, for those that don't know Carol, and I had the privilege of getting to know Carol years ago, she has had experience in both the White House, the Environmental Protection Agency, and that resulted in incredible achievements around specifically greenhouse gas reduction standards, stringent air pollution standards, fine particular air quality standards, as well in the United States. Based on your prior experience, should there be different standards for assessing and reporting greenhouse gas emissions, water and waste and biodiversity? And can you share what are some of the factors that need to be considered when evaluating some of these different standards across the E, S, and G categories?
How's that? Better. As we move from sort of the voluntary reporting regimes that companies have engaged in, which I want to applaud the private sector for all the leadership they've provided, into a more traditional regulatory regime, and whether that's California, the SEC, the EU, the list goes on and on and on. And I think it's important to remember why we want reporting, right? It's about the accountability, it's about materiality, making sure that what people are promising to do is actually being done. But it's also about creating public transparency, giving the public access to information. And so, if there was sort of one big to-do on this list of reporting and mandatory reporting, it would be to make sure that all of the systems are ultimately integrated, right? Because what the danger and what we're starting to see with clients is you're reporting in different regimes, and you're reporting slightly different because the questions are slightly different, but it starts to look like you're giving out different information. And so, I would like to see, and we've done this before. I did this when I was in the government, I do it with clients, but to work from both the private sector and the NGO sector to bring together parties on sort of, what it is we need, and then to work with the government to achieve that.
So you do see that as that's the opportunity. So you did a really nice job of highlighting the challenges, right? You have all these different types of ways to do it, and this bespoke way, almost on an ad hoc basis, and that's not scalable.
Right.
And in the voluntary world, we all, as corporate leaders, voluntarily moved in a certain space, and so you could have that ad hoc nature. But if you start to talk about the climate ledger, if you will, you got to find a way to turn that into taking that challenge into an opportunity. And I'd love for you to share just a little bit more about. So you talked about the end to end. We got to bring all these stakeholders together in that opportunity. And we all love opportunity, so I'm glad the walls are clapping as well. But anything else you can share about what else we can do? I mean, what else are you telling your clients? And when you were in government as well, where do you see? How do you bring some of that end to end? And especially we're in a place like this today, where hopefully this is an opportunity in a climate conference to do some of that. But some sort of behind the scenes look when you brought this end to end, because you successfully did it.
Right. So I think that obviously there's a role, which I'm sure this is being talked about in every single venue, for artificial intelligence, right? What role is that going to play to create this sort of comparability, right? How do we look across various companies, various countries, the commitments they're making? I think that will be, hugely important. But as I want to go back to being a former regulator and now working with clients who find themselves in a regulatory regime, we all have a responsibility to make sure that we don't end up with 6, 7, or 8 different regulatory regimes. And how do we best do that? And I think that government is great at adopting regulations, but they need help in shaping those regulations. And so how do we in the private sector, how do we in the NGO community come together? And the thing about it is the private sector has really been at the forefront of voluntary reporting. And I know our clients are finding it hard to understand a regulatory regime in some instances. But if we can find that common ground, if we can make sure that there is sort of conformity across all the regimes, I think it will really reverberate to everyone's benefit, because ultimately, to make the big changes we need to achieve the decarbonization we need as a planet is going to require public trust, and public trust will come through transparency.
Well, you know where I'm going to go next, Esther, on this one, because based on your work on GRI, and please do share with the rest of the group too a little more about GRI, where do you think there's the opportunity, but also where we're falling short on this interoperability that Carol was talking about, and what steps can be taken to help improve that pathway for the interoperability that we all are so interested in?
Yeah, actually, I'm more like sharing more from the private reporter's perspective. And 16 years ago, when I published my first sustainability report, and a lot of people don't really know what's going on. It's like, why are you so free? ESG is non-financial. Why are you reporting it? And then, especially in Asia, but fast-tracked to today, sustainability has exploded into our face in the mainstream. And sustainability report is actually a board statement that the board have to sign off in many stock exchanges already. And being a GRI board member, and also the first companies in Singapore to use it since 2008 as our core reporting framework. But over the years, the world has never stopped changing, so we have expanded, including a lot of the alphabet soup, and of course we have the UN Global Compact 10 Principle, the SDG 17 Goals, 169 Target, TCFD, CDP, and then of course we are in the real estate sector. We have the GRESB as well. So
there'll be a quiz on that later for everybody here.
Then of course we also in addressing the investors' question is like, how about like SASB? Then we actually incorporated it into our framework, and CDSB as well. And now, of course, TCFD is going to be part of ISSB. And indeed, we are surrounded by a lot of acronyms and all. And we do need a common language, because wherever your company is, whether Asia, Africa, US, Europe, you need to talk to investors who are from different parts of the world. So how do we align the language? How do we align the data? We are really in the crossroad of sustainability revolution, digital revolution, data revolution, technologies and all. And from the building sector, I can tell you that the technologies are actually available for net zero, but they don't come free. And you need to compete for ESG investment funds, which is fast growing, and also compete for sustainable finance. These 2 days we've been talking about green financing. There are like billions, trillions of dollars out there. And if listed company want to have a share of it, you have to dish out very strong ESG report card. So sustainability report is where you have to, come up with a story, strategy, and backed by numbers and data. So that is where the tools and the technology come into the picture. And of course, assurance is important. So unfortunately, before we can reach to one standard, which is still, a work in progress. And we are very glad to have brought GRI and ISSB to Singapore 2 weeks ago. And we have launched this Sustainability Innovation Lab that is exactly want to bring the two, global standards to come together to help reporter corporates, especially in the emerging market. It's a really big subject, complex subject. how can we help them, provide them the tool, the direction that, hey, we are all talking about net zero, the North Star. How are we going to charge to that direction with less pain and, more aligned with, the global language and global standard and ratings and all. And I think we can go on forever if you talk about a few hundred, ESG ratings and rankings. But the good thing is, whether it is MSCI, Dow Jones, FTSE, and they all are actually referring to the data of sustainability report. So I always tell people that if you can come up with a very good sustainability report with very good data and very transparent, very prompt, and ideally externally assured, half of the battle is won.
No, that's amazing. And I had the privilege of being on a panel and event with Michael earlier this week, I believe, although it's dog years. So was it yesterday or was it 3 days ago? I don't remember. But Michael, like Microsoft, McCormick and Company have been voluntarily reporting on your sustainability journey for several years. And you shared some insights before when we were chatting. How are you thinking about both the incoming regulatory work on your space, but then I can't help but want to hear you talk a little bit more about the supply chain as well, because this is something that I think you've really started to do incredible work around, and I would love for you to share a little bit more about those pieces.
First of all, Melanie, thank you and Microsoft for, one, being a great partner of McCormick, two, for your leadership in this space. I mean, it's remarkable, and I'm really delighted to be Carol and Esther to be on the same panel with you folks. This is something I call is a labor of passion. So we started our, we call it sustainability, but we changed it. We called it purpose-led performance because we believed, one, that the era of corporate social responsibility is over. This is in 2016. We said it, and we said we're going to lead with purpose. And that idea of leading with purpose meant that we can issue annual reports to tell you how we're doing. Two, it meant that we can report with confidence. And three, and most importantly, is we had the halo effect of TCFD. As much as people want to change it, I think most of the frameworks are going to align with TCFD. Look at CSRD and all the things happening. They align with that. So we went on believing that sooner or later, like today, voluntary will become mandatory. And I say that sincerely because that's the basis for which we started our PLP report, and which was simply that we want to be transparent. We also want to address issues around people, communities, and planet. One thing I didn't tell you, which I like to go back to, is McCormick is the king of spices. And so when you talk about reporting and data fidelity, it's critical because we source from over 80 different countries around the globe. And that is not an easy thing to handle if you don't have data that you can rely on. So the first thing we said when we issued the report, we've been issuing it, you can pull up our purpose-led performance report from our website, and you can read it and see what we've been doing. We issue another one next year. We issued one this year. So if you want to follow us, I recommend that. But here's the point. Right from the get-go, McCormick believed that data fidelity is critical. And that's the language we use to address the challenges that we're facing. And let me tell you, and be honest, it's on a journey. Before our relationship with Microsoft, we used to report with Excel spreadsheets. How many of you know how tedious that process is? But for me, though, the epiphany for me was every once in a while, after we've issued the data, people will come back and say, oh, Mike, there was something we found out in the waste, and we need to correct it. How is that going to help us with data fidelity? That's why we decided to embrace this idea of going to cloud. We've partnered with Microsoft and KPMG as an implementing partner. We're doing that for our scope 1 and 2. And I think Microsoft would tell you they're happy because it's like a pilot where we're using their cloud, what do you call it, C4S, to really address some of the opportunities that we see. And to me, that's where the thing is heading. I just talked about scope 1 and 2, but don't forget the bulk of our carbon footprint. In fact, to be precise, 95% is in our scope 3. And we don't have control. And so the point is this, that Melanie was trying to get to is, we recognize that early. In fact, because of that, we felt like we need to galvanize CPG companies to really partner with us as we delve into enabling suppliers to scale up so that the emission data will be something that we can rely on. And we did that because we know that most of the suppliers to us also supply to other people. That's why 2.5 years ago, we convened what we call Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition, or SLOC. We partnered with Microsoft and Mars to do that because some people that supply to us supply to them too. So guess what happened? As part of that process, McCormick and the other two companies funded this and hired Guidehouse to educate our suppliers, because if their data is wrong, our own cannot be, there'll be no data fidelity in there. So that journey we've been on today, 24 CPG companies are partners of this SLOC that we started, we convened. And over 700 suppliers are now involved, including suppliers in Egypt. So the point I'm making is, this is something we have to address collectively, but it needs leadership. And that's where our company has been on the forefront of that, because of this fact that we needed transparency. And I can talk later about some of the things we've learned from the pilot that we just completed with Microsoft and the feedback. That's why it's important to have a true partner. As we go into Scope 3 reporting, the emissions are a little more complicated. And at some point, I want to get to what I call product level carbon footprint. And I'll talk about that later. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I think there's often people like to focus on the negative, and I obviously like to focus on the positive. And so, Carol, I want to go to you because, former in the regulation side, regulator as well, and a leader, people often like to think that the cup half full on regulation is that it can have a chilling effect on things. But I don't think that's the case, and I don't think that's what we saw. And I'd love to sort of talk a little bit more about, as we move from voluntary reporting and things that Michael has done, has created so much change and so much impact, which is amazing. And now we're moving more into the mandatory space, where you no longer get to voluntarily, ask your suppliers to join in and do this work and grow that and scale that, because it's the right thing to do. And frankly, it's really good for business and it's great for the suppliers, because I'm sure that they've helped you, but they're also going to help so many other companies that are using the same supply chain. So I do see this as an incredible opportunity, but I think, those who like to focus on the negative would say, oh, this could have a chilling effect. How would you respond to that? Where do you see that opportunity when you move from voluntary to mandatory? What are the exciting things that come from that?
Well, I should probably start by saying that I'm a huge fan of mandatory. I have no problem with regulations. But first, I want to congratulate you and McCormick on your journey. And I thought you made a really important point that I'll take back over to the mandatory, which is the Scope 3. And the quality of what you need to report your Scope 3 will be enhanced when there's mandatory reporting, so you will know what you're getting from your suppliers. So when we're all doing it, you will, I think, see a dramatically improved reliability in information. What are regulations? They give the business community certainty and predictability. They ensure that everybody is doing the same thing, and so that the public or the investors can make the kind of decisions, informed decisions, that they need to make. Now, obviously, the regulators need to get it right. And one of the running EPA for 8 years, one of the things I always said to my friends in the NGO community, the environmental community, who were pushing me to do more and more and more, that I would listen to them, but I had to be really take into account what was practical, what was pushing the envelope with the regulated community. And what was really important to hear from the regulated community is how they would travel the journey in terms of meeting a standard. And I think that's why, I'll go back to where I started, a engagement between the NGO community and the private sector to help government really think about how to build a regulatory regime that will answer sort of everybody's needs, because you'll have, my dear friends in the environmental community are going to be out there more. And if you guys can't, if the private sector can't meet the more, you won't have the quality that we're going to need. But I think regulations properly done, at the end of the day, it is about predictability and certainty for the regulated interests.
Let's take this globally to another region. And, Esther, I'd love for you to comment on how you see the regulatory environment moving. We hear so much about CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is coming out of Europe. But we also know that it's not just a European conversation. And there's actually some really interesting things going on in Singapore, but also in the region. And so we'd love for you to share a little light. Let's make it more of a global show. It's not just a U.S. regulatory story, but what else is happening around the world, and share a little bit more from your region and Singapore.
Well, allow me to focus a bit more on the region that I'm familiar with in Asia. Actually, more than 80% of the company, almost close to 90%, are very familiar with GRI because it has a longer history, 26 years now, I believe. And so, when you're so used to a certain standard, you've just grown into it. And now suddenly they're getting a bit nervous. It's like, what is this ISSB, It is recognized by the authority and the stock exchanges. So are we supposed to change it overnight, So, and then I think, we haven't really have the capacity to look beyond that yet to Europe, because that is also something we hope that there's some synergy with GRI. And there are a lot of all these standard setters, all the leaders are here. I just bumped into Madi, and yesterday we have Suloid, so they are still in talk. What I like to think of positive. And I always believe in collaboration. So no point, you can agree to disagree, but you can also complement each other. Being familiar with GRI for so many years, I have used it as core, but over the years, I also added those that really are relevant to our business and our stakeholders. So we're talking from the whole value chain, which is from the land seller to how we design our property, how we manage and how we build, and tenants, home buyers. It's a whole a supply chain and all. So how do we talk to them that investors are very important, but they are not all? Okay, so SASB and ISSB is very, very focused on a value, which is very important. And GRI focus a lot more on impact and multi-stakeholders. So what I feel is we can actually combine it, based on what we learned over the 16 years. And in fact, this year, March, I adopted, before the global launch, the final S1, S2, I actually combined the two pillars approach, combining GRI on impact, on the environment, on people, human rights, labor practices on one side. The other pillar is ISSB, which combining TCFD, CDP, CDSB, and also, of course, SASB, more investor focus. So it actually helped that we can actually combine the two. And it works for our investor, it works for our regulators as well. So I suppose as a practitioner, the best way to showcase something or to preach something is by doing it. And a lot of other reporters feel that it's like, oh, this seems to be working. And we are very happy that 20th November, the two, Emmanuel and Elko, we feature them on the same stage. And the two is like, we were just joking that is a marriage of two, standards, and that they can hopefully live happily ever after. But having said that, different sector, different region, all have different, needs. And, so I think it's a good start, but it is not as simple as just marry the two. Yeah, so I think it is still a journey, but the good thing is we can bring people to the table and let's talk and find the best way that can communicate, that can allow a very transparent and prompt and effective communication between the reporter and the audience.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'd be curious as to how many of your peers and other companies that are operating in their region, they must be really looked to, you probably have a lot of conversations with them about what you've done, right? This marriage of two is probably an example. As everyone else is learning by doing, they're probably talking to you and asking for you to share this information with them as well, right? As an example of how a company, how a sustainability company can do something like this, right?
Yeah, definitely. We are part of the ASEAN, which is said to be the 5th largest economy. So every country has different strengths and, different areas that they can work on. So what we believe in is as a region, we can all progress together. We are in a similar, physical climate, and all that are also very subject to climate threats. Yeah. So I think it's just that different country has different, threats and different risks. So what we do is actually we convince them that actually reporting is a very good tool for you to set targets, focus on the pain point, find out what are the areas that you need to improve, and actually you can find opportunities. And there are always, a question of what do you find, challenges and opportunity. So I said the table has turned. In the good old days, that challenges are 80%, opportunities 20%. And now, with more technology solutions and advanced digital solutions, data analytic and all that, I think opportunities are 80%. Challenges, yes, there still are. There's still naysayers. I mean, you and I will believe in it for a long time, right? But there's still people who say, "Are you sure?" So, but we need to work on it, and I think 20% challenges we can overcome it.
This is a great segue to Michael. I mean, this is part of the conversation we had just a couple of days ago. I mean, love to get your thoughts on this. Another supply chain, another part of the world, another region. How are you thinking about this? How are regulations coming into your conversation or your thinking with your supply chain? And then, the climate risk piece I thought was a great pickup as well.
Thank you. First of all, before I address that, I just want to comment on something Carol said, because, I was a big admirer of her when she ran the EPA, because as a scientist, I think she was doing the right thing based on data. That's what we're talking about today. But Carol, there was something you said I wanted to pick up, and that's the issue of regulations and standards. I think we should all embrace regulations and standards. It's more important now than ever, but let me add something to what you said. As you think about climate finance, as you think about assurance, you're going to need to have a common framework to judge one company from the other. That's why we need something that is a little universal that we can all can buy into, because I don't know any single company on this planet that can finance everything they need to do to achieve net zero. I don't. And if they say they do, I'll question that. But if we go together and having a common framework so that we can support each other, the data we have, remember I talked about data fidelity, can feed it into each other. That's how we're going to get to this and get there successfully. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So back to some of the discussions here. It's really important to understand for us, it's a matter of what I call creating an enduring business. We source and sell in multiple countries around the globe. So we're a truly global company, right? And as you know, there is, when people talk about, which companies are growing, we're still a growth company. Because whether you have recession, there's no recession in eating. So companies like us have to think beyond where everybody is, because we're going to feed people. You got to spice it up and eat it, and it's healthy. But you have to think about it globally. So when it comes to the regulations, we're trying to be proactive and stay a little bit ahead. So I commented on TCFD being a framework we could all agree, for the most part, can guide us. That's what we're doing, because I hear the regulations from Asia, we're there. In Europe, a little bit ahead, so than the US, we're there. The US is also coming. Don't forget what might be on the horizon as we go in that way. And I think Carol may be in a better position to predict what will come. I can't, but I have to deal with the facts of we sell in those countries, and it is really important that we do that. And then the other thing is risk. How do you prevent risk in your supply chain? Now, one of the things that we see here is sometimes when we talk about it, we take a brush across the entire supply chain across the world, and we think it's so. In our own case, it's a little more challenging. So, majority of our farmers are individual mom and pop operations, individual farming communities. And the survivability of those communities depends on how we can enable them to do the right things. I just talked about at some point that we're going to have, carbon data, carbon footprint at a product level. In fact, I'm hoping that before 2024 is over, working with Microsoft, that we're going to demonstrate that. So that's a challenge for you to take back, Melanie. And the reason I say that is that's the only way we can create confidence. But I can't wait until we do it across the board before we can share it. I like to take it one step at a time. Even if it's 2 products that we start with, we can show people what is possible. You know what? Hope really is by really showing people what is possible. And that will allow us to have a groundswell of activities to address the challenges. The challenges are enormous. Don't get me wrong. That's why I think rather than wasting our time saying, do we need regulations or we don't? Do we need to look at risk or we don't? No, let's talk about what we can do. I like that comment. the positive things we can do to enhance it. That's the journey we're on. And last but not the least, one of the things I'm hoping is that as we get into this data fidelity, that the transparency will be obvious, what I call displayed for everybody to see. That's why I love your Power BI. I can't wait to see what that will do for us in the future. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. And that was actually, part of that transparency, to be able to use transparency and turn to action, was really one of the impetus for, frankly, one of the reasons why we're here in this space. Earlier this week, or last week rather, Microsoft announced a partnership with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to be a technology supporter for the Enhanced Transparency Framework and the Global Stocktake. And it's an opportunity to provide that data transparency and this sort of common language that allows us to be visible, and it's digitized, and allows the 100,000 people plus to be able to access this information from the nationally determined contributions, from the emissions footprints of these countries rather. And it's just an important place so policymakers have access to this in a far faster fashion. Carol took part of this, I took part of this when we were in the US government. The process to date really was a team showing up in Washington. It's getting added to our calendars to go meet with the team. They're going to interview you and turn it into a document and then put it forward into the system. I'm just excited about how much faster that process is going to be now that we have, this partnership underway. So I think that's really, really great, and I really appreciate that. I'd like to, can you please share?
I just want to say something to Michael's very kind words. Data. It is a crucial part of this. So when we talk about having some sort of unified reporting regime, we can talk about you're going to report A, B, C, D, E, F. All of that has to be informed by the data. And so part of the agreement has to be is what is that data that is informing it? Because you won't have an accurate comparison. You won't have the transparency you want for the investor, for the public, if there's not an agreement on, is it real-time emissions monitoring? What are you allowed to extrapolate from your real-time to places where perhaps you don't have real-time? And so the data inputs, in some ways, we can start the conversation up here. We can start with we want transparency. We can start with we want these things reported. Or we can start from what's the data we have, what's the data we need, and what can we build, to get there. And I think there's, as I look out there in terms of what companies are managing right now, what all of that will do is not only give you, hopefully, public confidence, but greenwashing is becoming a huge concern. Companies are finding more and more, the governments are engaging, there are civil litigation around greenwashing. Again, if we have a shared view of both data and reporting, then we won't have to confront, on a one-off basis, is something you're saying, accurate, or is it greenwashing? And then final, to Michael's point, on climate risk. Again, how do we, if I'm a company and I work with companies on defining what are their climate risks, again, how do I know you've defined yours the same as I've defined mine without some sort of agreement on the data?
No, that's great. And a few things that strike me as how exciting it is to have a conversation like this about reporting and data at this point in time. And I would say for those that are here in the room or are online as well, to turn that into something more concrete, I do encourage you to take a look at Global Renewables Watch, because that's a great example of how do you think about data, but then look at it visually. This is a project we're doing with the Nature Conservancy and Planet, where it just showcases where renewables are and where it's not, right? And it's a data-driven effort, and it's a visual one to really understand how fast are we actually moving forward with getting clean energy online in the places where we need. And it's built on trusted data, and it's built on be able to depict this so that we all can see, because again, we have, sometimes I feel like it's not concretized in my own head, and so I really find these types of tools really helpful. So thank you for that. I'd love to, I know that we might open this up for a few questions if there are any, but I thought, to kind of close out this conversation, which has been so interesting. There's we can take one of two ways, so I'll let it be a sort of choose your own adventure on this question. One question would be, if you had a crystal ball and you could look into the future, and you can look at COP29, so 1 year from now, what do you think the state of sustainability reporting is? Because again, like I said, I can't imagine this conversation last year for us to be here having such a robust discussion around reporting and the move from voluntary to mandatory and the role that reporting is playing, and the fact that so many companies, whether you're part of that 50,000 under European CSRD or you're any of the companies here, you're starting to think about reporting and taking that reporting to the next level and the importance of sustainability reporting. So I think that's one question is, if you had a crystal ball, what does this look like next year? Because it does feel like how far we've come in just one COP cycle is really incredible. Or the other venture question could be, how do we think about ensuring that sustainability reporting really incorporates water, waste, communities, and it's not just carbon. I think that, for Microsoft, our targets are not just carbon. We are goals to be carbon negative by 2030, water positive, a zero waste company, and that also protects ecosystems. And so to really, think about it from the holistic perspective. So just wanted to have you choose your own adventure and then, pick either, any, or, but really just this has been such a great, rich discussion. So thank you. So why don't we start with Esther?
Okay, I think, the power of data is actually finding solutions and collaboration. If you go back to 2 years ago, every day we wake up, whether you're Singapore, Hong Kong, I know the data, how many cases of COVID happen in other parts of the world. And the sharing of data is very powerful. And then together, everyone share the same goal. Is like, let's get rid of this, tackle this pandemic together. So that is the power of data. We have recently seen it. But of course, the data reliability validation is very important. Yeah. So, but I think we look at data to find solution, to create the impact that we want. Same apply to climate. And of course, now when we talk about net zero, and expert will tell you that the transition to net zero is not only relying on energy decarbonization. Only 55% rely on energy solutions. The other 45% rely on circular economy solutions. That brings us back to how are we going to restore and regenerate nature? And that is really a focus that we need to look at. In Singapore, we really have almost zero natural resources. We import almost everything from water to energies to now we resolve the problem of water, and we need to look at energy. And even we have almost zero agriculture. We only produce 10% of the nutritious needs that the whole country needs, which is not very safe, not very sustainable. So we find a lot of solutions that, when you are desperate, you will find solution and innovative ideas. But technology, best practices is our strength. And keeping the country clean and green, although we are next to the equator, it's very livable. The air is clean, and then the temperature is actually quite livable, I would say. And that is why greenery is so important for us. Being a small country, we have one of the highest green coverage, in the world. So these are our assets. And our assets is also collaboration as part of the larger community of ASEAN. And sharing information, data, the pain points, like I said, the weakness is very important. Asia Pacific actually account for more than 50% of greenhouse gas emission globally. We also know that last 50 years, we lost 50% of forests. So these are all very scary data. But without that, you won't know that what is happening. I don't know the world is talking about net zero, but where are we now and what are we working on? So I think all these data facts are very important. But in the end of the day is how do we arrive at solution, working together. It's like in ASEAN, Singapore is very small. No matter what we do, we can't rely on generation of renewable energy. I just don't have enough land. Yeah, we have no hydro or wind. So we have to look at regional collaboration on regional grid. Hopefully, we can bring in the renewable energy generated from our larger, neighboring country. So I think the collaboration, I like the data fraternity, and in fact, it should be ESG fraternity also. That everybody to come together, share what we have, and all help each others out. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. I think you asked a tough question to close us, and that is this idea of crystal ball and sustainability. Here's my take on it. I'm going to start with COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh last year. That was the first time that the financial community came to play ball. And I was on a panel then. I was the odd person out because there were a bunch of financial institutions and me talking about supply chain. In 1 year, to your point, we've gone so far. So in the next year, let me tell you another thing that gives me hope for accelerating. We're going to see sustainability be on center stage at every event, at every company, and at every institution. The reason is, where are we today? We're in Abu Dhabi. This is a fossil fuel country. And notice what they did. They actually enable people to start talking about lives. You know, I saw the proclamation yesterday on health, as we include all of that. That, to me, is an advancement that you couldn't have predicted a year ago. So I'm saying the crystal ball for the next year will be surprising to most people, because sustainability will be the foundation of any strategy, any viable business, and any hope. And by the way, it is the right thing, because this is no longer about those of us that are really working on it. It's about the future. And the future generation won't let us get away with anything. So I can see it taking even a much, much impactful stage at a COP 29. Thank you.
It's always hard to predict the future. When I first went to work for President Obama in the White House, you know, we were in the United States talking about building LNG import facilities. We now build LNG export facilities. That happened in sort of a several-year period. But at the risk of not being right, I would say, first of all, a lesson from this COP that I think is important in framing future COPs. You know, we've been to a lot of them, partake in a lot of them. It's always been about what's the aspiration, what's the commitment. We have now switched to a conversation to operationalize, and that is hugely important, that we are talking about how to, not what to. So, you know, kudos to everyone who's been part of that journey, really important. I think at the next COP, I would hope we have reached an agreement on a universal language for reporting. I think that is key, and the longer we wait to do it, the messier it will become, because companies, NGOs, governments will get locked in on their particular regime. And the final thing, Melanie, on the issue of sort of all sustainability reporting, the E, S, and G, for me, it's all become climate reporting. And so whether I'm talking about a supply chain, I'll use you as an example, you know, loss of biodiversity, that is a climate risk for you. That is a reality of a climate risk. And so, you know, there are many ways to think about it, but I think we need to think about it in an integrated fashion. You know, we can't have the stovepipes, the separate sectors reporting, because at the end of the day, it's all going to be about how are we managing our carbon footprint, how are we managing the decarbonization journey. And, you know, I come from Florida. I was a regulator in Florida. You know, what we're doing to water there, and then you layer in climate change. It's a radically different, you know, scenario. And so operationalize, universal language on reporting, and it's all about climate all the time.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to close out this panel, but if there were any questions, we would have time for, I think we've got a time for 1 or 2 questions we could take as well. So with that, and we do have a microphone. So just introduce yourself, and we'll take your question. Thank you.
Hello, it's a fantastic opportunity to hear the global expertise about the sustainability reporting. My name is Iva Kazanska. I've been doing the reporting for governments and global corporate representative offices here in MENA region for the past 3 years. So, and the reporting is my favorite topic, because this is how we were able to accelerate the sustainability journey for many companies. And this is actually one of the highlights that I wanted to hear your opinion about, because when you come to a company and the stakeholders taking the decision to do the sustainability journey, so he thinks about hiring the department, whereas sometimes you need to define the goals and get the idea of the alphabet soup. So what exactly do you need and what exactly you want to report? So that's my first question. Secondly, I would like to see a global perspective. So in GCC region, you cannot compare the economy with, like, as an oil exporting country. You cannot compare some things, for example, like with economies that actually are focusing on services or else, everything else. So the government is thinking closely of developing the other set of standards. So which leads us to the next round of reporting and cooperation in the sector. So how do you think that could be tackled? And last but not the least, you spoke about data. We currently think that it's important to put some of the aspects on blockchain, because that would make it verifiable. So from technology perspective, what is your take on that? Thank you.
So let me take the last question on data. And everything you talked about on that last question is about data transparency and how we can use it to enable business to grow. Last year, at the UN General Assembly, McCormick had the pleasure of really showing what could happen when you have a seamless link of data from source, from farm. In our own case, let me not speak in parables. We work with farmers, from farm to table. And we use it using a blockchain. In fact, it was one of the highlights at the Hunger Week when they were talking about the events. It was showcased because we went from Madagascar. I don't know how many of you have been there. By the way, 80% of the world's natural vanilla comes from Madagascar, not the chemical stuff that will kill you. And that's where we source exclusively. And so we tracked it from the farmer in Madagascar doing the sustainable practices, regenerative practices, all the way to the export, all the way to our factory, all the way to, this was in France. If you're French, you know about Vahiné. It's a very powerful brand, and that's McCormick, all the way to Carrefour. And that is what the type of transparency, remember what I said, you got to give people hope. You don't have to perfect it. I think the mistake we make in sustainability is we want it to be perfect. In my opinion, progress over perfection is what we should be advocating for. So we demonstrated this and showed how it could work using a supply chain. Obviously, if you talk to Microsoft, the experts, I'm not, these are immutable data, am I right? That nobody can mess up with. So that gives us confidence that we can do it. Hence, when I talk about the importance of data fidelity, importance of the type of work we're collaborating with Microsoft, that's really where this thing comes together. So your question was appropriate, and I leave the rest to my colleagues. Thanks.
Yeah, your question. You know, we've talked about what it means for the public. We've talked about what it means for financial institutions. It also is more than just, quote, reporting for the company, because you will manage what you measure, right? And you will be able to make a better business plan towards decarbonization if you are using all of the data that you are collecting. So I think we need to, there is something in it besides just the reporting requirement. There is a management skill. And I think that, you know, what I realized working in the private sector is that sustainability, climate change, you only make progress in a company when it is embedded in every single business decision, when it's part of the XCOM's responsibility and KPIs, right? If it's people over here reporting and coming out and doing a few measurements and reporting, you will not make real progress in terms of your decarbonization strategy or your water or your biodiversity, et cetera. So I think we need to just put that footnote in, Melanie, that there is a use for this material and this reporting requirement inside the organization.
Just a quick address to like how, you know, and honestly, when we first started reporting, the report was very, very thin, okay? And it's getting thicker and thicker until 2013, we say, hey, we can't produce a phone book, right? So 2014, we started working on materiality study. It's beautiful. It's really helping us to look at internal, stakeholder, what they think are most material ESG issues, and also the external stakeholder. Sometimes they can be so different, and that actually allowed us to align, what is most important, and also give us the direction. It's to like, hey, 2014, 15, it was like corporate governance, legal compliance and all. 2017, the top issue was innovation, and then climate change, energy efficiency. Because your issue, ESG issue, go with the change of the environment and also what investors and stakeholders want. So from 2017, we were very surprised that it's innovation. So we were like, okay, mitigation of risks are not sufficient. We need risk adaptation. So from then on, we actually really full force charge into innovation. And that's how, reporting is not just about operational reporting, but it can set strategy, for future, to future-proof your business.
Well, thank you so much for that, and we will wrap up the session as well here. So I want to thank my guests. You're fantastic, and I just thought that was a really, really just such an interesting conversation, and I'm excited to see what the next COP conversation looks like on the next stage. So please join me in thanking our guests.